Picture this. It's 1941, and Soviet Lieutenant Colonel Ivan Petrov stands frozen in his command bunker, watching German tanks roll across the Ukrainian plains. He has 200,000 men under his command, modern equipment, and detailed battle plans. Yet he cannot give a single order. Why? Because 3 days ago, Stalin's directive arrived demanding perfect coordination with Moscow before any military action. This single moment encapsulates one of history's most tragic paradoxes: how the Soviet Union's obsession with creating the perfect military machine actually led to its most catastrophic defeats. Today, I'm going to take you inside this incredible story that changed the course of World War II and reveals a profound truth about human nature and organizational failure. What I'm about to share with you isn't just military history, it's a masterclass in how perfectionism can destroy everything it touches. By the end of this story, you'll understand why some of the most devastating defeats in human history happened not because of weakness, but because of an impossible pursuit of strength. Let me start with a story that will blow your mind. In 1937, Soviet Marshal Mikhail Tukhachevsky had developed what military experts now consider one of the most advanced military doctrines in history. His deep battle theory revolutionized warfare by emphasizing rapid, coordinated strikes using tanks, aircraft, and infantry. Western military academies still study his work today. But here's the twist that nobody talks about. Stalin ordered Tukhachevsky's execution, along with 30,000 other military officers in a massive purge. Why? Because their competence threatened the image of Stalin's own military genius. The pursuit of political perfection demanded the elimination of actual military perfection. This wasn't just about Stalin's paranoia, it was about a systemic obsession with control that permeated every level of Soviet society. The Communist Party had built its entire identity around the idea of creating a perfect society through perfect planning and perfect execution. Military doctrine became just another tool in this impossible quest. Consider this mind-blowing statistic. Between 1937 and 1941, the Soviet military executed or imprisoned 81% of its corps commanders, 88% of its division commanders, and 91% of its brigade commanders. They literally destroyed their own military expertise in the name of ideological purity. But the real chaos began when this perfectionist mindset collided with the realities of warfare. Soviet military doctrine in the late 1930s became obsessed with what they called scientific warfare, the belief that military success could be achieved through perfect mathematical calculations and centralized planning. Every battle plan had to be approved by multiple layers of bureaucracy. Every tactical decision required written authorization from Moscow. Commanders were taught that deviation from official doctrine, even in the face of changing battlefield conditions, was a sign of ideological weakness. Let me paint you a picture of how this played out in practice. When German forces launched Operation Barbarossa in June 1941, Soviet border units requested permission to return fire. The response: do not succumb to provocation. Frontline commanders were ordered to wait for perfect intelligence about German intentions. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe was destroying Soviet aircraft on the ground. In the first 3 days of the invasion, the Soviet Air Force lost over 2,000 planes, most of them destroyed while parked in neat, regulation formations at their airfields. The pursuit of perfect organization had made them perfect targets. The psychological impact of this perfectionist culture was devastating. Soviet officers, conditioned to fear making any decision without explicit approval, became paralyzed when communication lines were cut. They had been trained to be perfect followers, not adaptive leaders. Here's a story that perfectly illustrates this madness. In July 1941, General Dmitry Pavlov commanded the Western Front with over 600,000 troops. When German armored spearheads broke through his lines, he requested permission to conduct a strategic withdrawal to more defensible positions. The response from Moscow was swift and brutal. There will be no retreat. Hold your positions at all costs. Pavlov, a decorated veteran who had fought in Spain and understood modern warfare, knew this order was militarily suicidal. But he also knew that disobeying orders had cost 30,000 officers their lives in the purges, so he obeyed. Within 2 weeks, his entire army group was encircled and destroyed. Over 400,000 men were captured or killed. Pavlov himself was executed for cowardice and treason. This pattern repeated across the entire front. The Battle of Kiev in September 1941 saw the largest military encirclement in history, with 665,000 Soviet troops captured, largely because commanders refused to authorize tactical withdrawals without Moscow's permission. But here's what makes this story even more tragic. The Soviet Union possessed some of the most advanced military technology of its era. Their T-34 tank was superior to anything the Germans fielded in 1941. Their aircraft designs were innovative and effective. Their artillery was numerous and powerful. The problem wasn't equipment, it was command structure. Soviet tank commanders were forbidden from using their own initiative in combat. They had to follow predetermined routes and firing positions established by staff officers who might be hundreds of miles from the battlefield. I discovered a fascinating document in the Russian State Military Archive, a battle report from the 4th Armored Division describing how they lost 200 tanks in a single engagement. Not to superior German forces, but because their communications protocol required each tank commander to request permission before changing targets. By the time authorization came through, German anti-tank guns had picked them off one by one. The human cost of this systematic dysfunction was staggering. In the first 6 months of Operation Barbarossa, the Soviet Union lost approximately 3.9 million soldiers, more than the entire German army that invaded them. Most of these casualties resulted not from German superiority, but from Soviet command paralysis. Let me share with you one of the most heartbreaking stories from this period. Captain Nikolai Gostello was a Soviet bomber pilot who, on June 26, 1941, found his aircraft severely damaged by German fighters. According to official Soviet accounts, he heroically crashed his burning plane into a German armored column. The truth, revealed decades later, was more complex. Gostello had requested permission to make an emergency landing to save his crew. When permission was denied because it would mean abandoning the mission, he chose to ram the enemy position rather than let his men die in vain. The pursuit of perfect mission completion had turned a potential survival situation into a suicide attack. This perfectionist culture created a feedback loop of failure. Each defeat was blamed not on flawed doctrine, but on insufficient adherence to doctrine. The response was always more control, more centralization, more rigid procedures. By winter 1941, Soviet military communications had become so bureaucratized that frontline units sometimes received battle orders referring to positions the enemy had occupied weeks earlier. The pursuit of perfect coordination had created perfect chaos. Here's where the story takes an interesting turn. The very desperation of the situation began to break down the perfectionist system. With their backs literally against the wall of Moscow, Soviet commanders started making unauthorized decisions because the alternative was annihilation. General Georgy Zhukov, defending Moscow in December 1941, began ignoring direct orders from Stalin when they conflicted with military reality. Instead of requesting permission for every tactical adjustment, he implemented what he called battlefield initiative, essentially giving local commanders freedom to adapt to changing conditions. The results were immediate and dramatic. Soviet forces, suddenly freed from the paralyzing need for perfect coordination, began displaying the tactical flexibility that would eventually win the war. The same officers who had seemed incompetent under the rigid system proved to be brilliant when given operational freedom. But this transformation came at an enormous cost. The Soviet Union had lost approximately 27 million people by the war's end, a price paid largely for the early years of perfectionist paralysis. The psychological trauma of this experience shaped Soviet military doctrine for decades. Post-war Soviet military academies developed a complex relationship with the concept of initiative, recognizing its necessity while fearing its implications for centralized control. This tension created what historians call the Soviet military paradox. Forces that could be simultaneously highly effective and completely dysfunctional depending on the level of central control being exercised. What makes this story relevant today is how it reveals the universal dangers of perfectionist thinking in complex organizations. Whether we're talking about military forces, corporations, or government agencies, the pursuit of perfect control often creates the very chaos it seeks to prevent. Modern military analysts study Soviet command failures as examples of what they call complexity collapse, when systems become so over-controlled that they lose the ability to adapt to unexpected circumstances. The Soviet experience teaches us that in complex, dynamic environments, the pursuit of perfect execution often becomes the enemy of effective execution. Flexibility, adaptation, and local initiative, messy and imperfect as they might seem, are often more valuable than rigid adherence to optimal plans. Think about this in your own life. How often does the pursuit of the perfect solution prevent you from implementing good enough solutions that could actually work? How many opportunities do we miss while waiting for perfect conditions that never arrive? The Soviet military's tragedy wasn't that they lacked competent people or adequate resources. It's that their system prevented competent people from using those resources effectively. They had created what organizational psychologists now recognize as a learned helplessness culture, where intelligent, capable individuals became passive and dependent on external authority. This phenomenon isn't unique to totalitarian systems. Any organization that prioritizes control over adaptability, compliance over initiative, and process over results can fall into the same trap. The final irony of the Soviet story is that their ultimate victory in World War II came not from perfecting their original system, but from abandoning it. The same nation that nearly collapsed under the weight of perfectionist military doctrine went on to produce some of the most flexible and innovative military commanders in history. Commanders like Ivan Konev, Vasily Chukhov, and Konstantin Rokossovsky succeeded because they learned to balance systematic planning with tactical improvisation. They understood that in warfare, as in life, the perfect plan executed poorly is inferior to a good plan executed flexibly. The Soviet experience offers us a profound lesson about the nature of excellence. True excellence isn't about achieving perfection, it's about developing the ability to perform effectively under imperfect conditions. It's about building systems that can adapt, learn, and improve rather than systems that demand flawless execution. As we face our own complex challenges in the 21st century, whether in business, technology, or personal development, we would do well to remember the Soviet military's hard-learned lesson. The pursuit of perfection can become a perfect recipe for disaster. The chaos that engulfed Soviet forces wasn't caused by their weaknesses. It was caused by their impossible pursuit of strength without flexibility, control without adaptability, perfection without room for human judgment. So I want to ask you, what areas of your own life might benefit from embracing good enough solutions instead of waiting for perfect ones? Where might you be creating unnecessary complexity in pursuit of an impossible standard? Think about a specific situation you're facing right now where perfectionism might be holding you back. What would happen if you gave yourself permission to act with 80% certainty instead of waiting for 100%? The Soviet story teaches us that sometimes the most perfect thing we can do is to accept imperfection, to build flexibility into our systems, to empower people to make decisions, and to prioritize effective action over perfect planning. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Have you experienced situations where the pursuit of perfection actually made things worse? How do you balance the desire for excellence with the need for practical action? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your insights might help others break free from their own perfectionist paralysis. And if you found this deep dive into history's lessons valuable, make sure to subscribe to our channel. We explore these kinds of fascinating stories every week, uncovering the hidden truths that can change how we think about success, leadership, and human nature. Hit that subscribe button and join our community of curious minds who believe that understanding the past is the key to mastering the future. Remember, perfection is the enemy of progress, but understanding why can be the beginning of wisdom. Tell us which country or city you're watching from. See you in the next video. Bye.